Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best. I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome back to episode 137 of the Last Round Podcast. Thank you again for joining us, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Boxing Socials, YouTube channel, wherever you're at, however you're listening. We appreciate it. Coming off, I would think, one of the best fights of the year so far on Showtime between Charlo and Castano, undisputed draw. Unfortunately, it was a draw, but I was entertained, and obviously we'll touch on that in a second or two. But this week we have a first timer here on the Last Round. We've been told, Ben, by our listeners. They've messaged us on Twitter, on Instagram, like, hey, you should get that Ben Baby guy from ESPN. He's covering boxing and we don't know, we want to know more about him. And, they've been telling us that for about, I think the first message we got was maybe about 6-7 months ago.
Wow.
So we've been meaning to reach out to you, so we definitely appreciate it. If you're wondering whose voice that is, that's ESPN's Ben Baby. He covers the NFL, specifically the Cincinnati Bengals, for ESPN, and has also been covering the sport of boxing for the last 2 or 3 years or so. Ben, we appreciate you coming on this week on the Last Round.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. This is, I told y'all in kind of the pre-show meeting, this is my first boxing podcast, period. And it's funny when I do. So like you said, I cover the NFL. And have been covering football basically almost as my main beat since, I've been in the business. And everybody always asks me, well, what's your favorite sport? And I always tell them, well, it's boxing. And they're like, wait, really? And I said, oh, yeah, of course. I mean, it's always been my favorite sport, ever since I really got into it. I tell people all the time, every other sport is basically just a metaphor for boxing. Like boxing is the ultimate sport. Like, another, like in football, like you'll see a team score a touchdown in the fourth quarter and you'll go, oh, was that the knockout blow? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, you can actually see the knockout blow, and you can actually see when someone gets knocked down in boxing. So it's really fun, and I've had a blast. I've actually been doing it for ESPN for really in this capacity for about the last year or so, and it's been an absolute blast, especially during COVID. Another thing to stay busy. So I've had a lot of fun doing it. I appreciate the listeners, saying that. It's very kind of them to do so. Sometimes, as a writer, you wonder if anyone's ever reading any of your stuff, even at a place like ESPN. That's still a fear you have, and even though the numbers kind of say otherwise, it's good to know, you still kind of have that fear, like, oh, is anyone actually reading some of this stuff? So it's kind of nice to know, and I appreciate the kind words.
Awesome. Yeah, we definitely appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to jump on with us this week. As I mentioned just before we came on air, Ben, we kind of want to start with like your background, pretty much how you came to be in the journalism game in the United States, obviously, and obviously eventually how you were tasked with covering the sport of boxing. Did you request it? Were you asked by, maybe the higher ups at ESPN? Because obviously, like you mentioned, your main beat is the NFL, Cincinnati Bengals specifically. But you do dabble in some boxing, which is, we definitely appreciate when others from other sports definitely lend their talents to our sport. How did you start? Well, let's start, I guess back in the day. Did you always want to be a reporter / journalist growing up? When did you know that you wanted to get into that game?
Honestly, I think about this as far back as I can remember. That's the only thing I've ever wanted to do it. It's been an absolute blessing because a lot of people, at a young age, they don't really know what they want to do. Or even they get in their 20s, they get out of college, they're still like, well, what am I supposed to do for a living? And ever since I was like 6-7 years old, like that's just kind of how I always wanted to be around sports. And back in the day, you looked at, well, what was the best way to do that if you weren't playing? And it was usually being a writer. And so I've kind of always had that track of wanting to be a sports writer and a sports journalist. And so I've done this now. I think this will be my 10th year full time in the business. And so I've always had an inclination of doing it. It's been a lot of fun, and it's a neat way, and it always stays new. It always stays fresh. There's always kind of new things that come up, and it keeps the job exciting. So it's been an absolute just joy to just be in this. And I don't mean that as a cliche, like it is an absolute blast.
Nice. I think I saw some information that you were before ESPN, you were covering some beats in Texas, right?
Yes.
Can you talk about your time there and how you eventually came to ESPN?
Yeah, so the way it works in Texas, and this is going to be really weird for the UK listeners. So like if they've seen Friday Night Lights, this may explain it a little bit. But we take our high school football seriously in Texas, and so in football in general, it's very much like ingrained, like how the understanding of it, how much people care about it. It's a really big deal. So naturally, basically all the top sports writing jobs at every publication generally revolve or involve football. And so I started out covering high school football. Early on in Denton, Texas. I went to school at the University of North Texas. Then I worked at the Denton Record Chronicle. Then went to the San Antonio Express News, covered high schools there, covered college football for the Dallas Morning News, which is one of the bigger papers in the entire Southeast, and always had a great record of a great sports section. And then I've been at ESPN since 2019. And what's funny is that this is the third job where I have a primary job, but then along the way, they've kind of lost a boxing writer, and they've said, "Hey, you like boxing? Do you want to cover this?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So it's weird. This is the third time this has happened, where I've just kind of stumbled my way into boxing coverage. So I'm kind of used to it by now, and I'm not complaining one bit.
So they asked you. It wasn't like you volunteered. Like they came to you, like, "Hey, aren't you a boxing fan? Do you want to cover this?"
Well, I told them from the beginning, like during that, I think when I went during the interview process in Bristol, I nudged somebody and said, "Hey, if Dan Rayfield or if anybody needs some help, I'm more than happy to help out and pinch hit." And for me, like I think, I am a boxing fan, but secondly, I think boxing has always lent itself to really great storytelling. And as much as I love sports, I absolutely love great sports writing. And if you go back and you read, as a junkie, stuff from the 50s and 60s, especially when boxing was at its heyday, and you see a lot of these great eras, it was also great eras of sports writing. So you had, really great guys, like A.J. Liebling, Red Smith, Jimmy Cannon, you could Frank DeFord, the list goes on and on. W.C. Hines, like the list of great sports writers in America in the 20th century. A lot of them, wrote about the boxing at some point in time. I mean, you Norman Mailer, wrote a great story, Ego. That was a big thing. Mark Cram, Lottie, he's great about Ali Frazier. I mean, there's so many great, when you look at great sports writing, and that was really cool for me to see as I took sports writing more seriously. You saw so much great boxing coverage, great storytelling and great writing. So it's been a lot of fun. I think that's really, you can tell some really great stories in boxing, which is why I've always said, as much as I'm a fight fan, I'm also a fan of my craft as well. And I want to see what I can tell in that space.
And what are the two major differences in reporting in, boxing and football? Obviously two completely different sports, but in terms of like access and how the fans react to your pieces.
Yeah, it's funny. I've gotten more traction for some of my boxing stuff than I have on some of my Bengals stuff. The boxing fan base. A lot of people have wondered, especially at different media companies. Well, who cares about boxing? Like, what kind of fans are there? And the fans are rabid. They absolutely care. We look at the numbers on our stories, like I said, and the people are definitely reading about boxing, especially at ESPN.com. We've been really invested. We just hired Mike Coppinger, which is great. I joked with him. I said, it's good. Now we can stop getting beat on stories. We just hired you so you can break them for us now. And Cop's been phenomenal. What's funny is boxing, it's a little more open. By and large, you're able to get a hold. People are a little more accessible. Like, for example, I was in Dallas or Arlington for Canelo, Billy Joe Saunders, and I saw Eddie Hearn just do interviews with absolutely anybody who was willing to do that, and they were really open to that. Even a guy like Canelo of his stature was doing a good amount of interviews, and spent some time doing that. Like in football and in major American sports, you're not necessarily seeing your Eddie Hearn types. You'll sit there and do hours and hours and hours of media with just about anybody. And there is kind of that openness in boxing, and part of that's needed, especially, in this current era of boxing coverage in mass media. You're going to need to basically sell your sport as hard as possible, which is good. I mean, that helps us out. It helps us. And most of the time you see more unfiltered stories, or guys less willing to be hesitant about what they say, because they're really, it's not like a coach is going to get mad at you for saying something, or there's like a team owner who's going to be really upset. You can, basically just say whatever you want, and there's really no repercussions. I mean, there's countless stories of guys in boxing just going off the handle, and it ends up being pretty entertaining. So boxing's great when it's got colorful characters, and then we see so many of them in the sport, and other sports. I wish we had more of that in probably some of the more major American sports.
Ben, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure I read a story this week. Aren't like high school or college players now charging for interviews, and didn't they sign like a deal for like $10,000 or something?
What's funny is that's my old beat. I used to cover Texas A&M, and TexAgs is the recruiting website that did that. And it's basically, the media is not paying. So I like the TexAgs folks a lot. I don't think they're really journalists. I don't think they're going to argue they're journalists. They're basically somebody wanted to pay the players, and TexAgs became the vehicle for that. And which is good. Let's be honest. I think anybody who's been around college football has understood that there's a chance players have been getting paid under the table for quite a long time, and which hasn't been legal and allowed by the NCAA. And basically, that what we saw, maybe just a little bit, maybe just a little money here and there. Like if you've covered college football for like 2 seconds, you've heard a story that you're like, that sounds like, I can't prove it, but that sounds like it should be true, which means they're cheating pretty well. So I think that's kind of an example of that. You're seeing the players, the media company was essentially the middleman for the payment to be made, which is fine. I mean, guys, listen, I hold the same view in boxing as I do football, is that if you're willing to put your body on the line for entertainment and suffer physical punishment, you should make every dollar possible. That's why I'm not upset when boxers, want to make more money, when football players, say, we need money. Like if I'm in the NFL, if I was an NFL player, I'd say, yeah, I'm against the salary cap. Pay me every dollar I possibly can get. I'm glad that college athletes, specifically college football players, are doing that, because there's a lot of punishment that your body takes. And you should be getting money for that, because all these companies across the board are making hundreds of millions, off of athletics. So it all makes sense. But yeah, I think that it's good that we're seeing boxing. I think this Canelo deal with Caleb Plant, Canelo could be getting a very lucrative payday, as reported by Mike Coppinger, which is great. You want to see, number one, it shows the sports at a healthy, viable place, and number two, you want guys who are getting hit in the head all the time to get paid top dollar, because you should maximize those earnings while you can.
Ben, in the short time that you've been covering the sport of boxing, you mentioned that you were at Canelo Billy Joe Saunders in Dallas, or Arlington, excuse me. What, in any interviews that you've conducted since covering the sport, which one stands out the most to you?
Probably my one with Tank Davis. So Showtime's been really good about, giving us, so shout out to Greg Domino, and the folks over there. All of them have just been really great. To deal with, and which is good, because it's a lot of. I tell Showtime and everybody else, I said, yeah, I know that we're technically on the other side of the street, but on ESPN.com there are no sides of the street. We want to tell the best stories. We don't really care who's promoting them, and so it was good. I was actually in town for Taylor Ramirez, in Vegas, and then I was talking to Tank, and Tank in the interview was kind of basically just, it looked like Tank didn't really want to be there. He was kind of out of it. And I referenced Tank, I think it's really interesting what's happening, between 135 and I guess now 140. You've got basically the four princes of boxing, this kind of the new era of, Tank, Teofimo, Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney. And, right now, Teo's win over Vasily Lomachenko is by far the best win that any of those four have. Mm-hmm. And I brought that up to Tank, and Tank basically did not like that I said that. And he's like, I said alone, and I explained it, and I was like, no, Tank, and we went back and forth, and he said, he claimed that Tank, we all know Vasily's better at 135 or 130, which I'm not disputing that one bit, but I said, Tank, yeah, that's correct, but he was also a pound for pound. He's like, we all considered him one of the best pound for pound, and Tank just went, okay, and then we went on, and it was a spicy interview, but it was fun. Like, it was a good amount of back and forth. I think Jermell Charlo's got a little upset that I did not have him in our pound for pound top 10. I think we quickly saw why he wasn't in the pound for pound top 10. But I'll be honest, I think if Jermell had beaten Brian Castano, I think you would have had to put him, even if you didn't think he was one of the top 10 fighters. And here's why. I have a ton of respect for guys who are willing to go out and prove themselves and really compete in boxing and test themselves and say, I want to be a legitimate champion. And as much as, we may not think that, that 154, that division, just really, there's not a whole lot of pop there. And we don't really know how good that is. I respect the fact that Jermell, has taken on some tougher fights, was willing to take on Castano. And, he could have went to Al Heyman and said, I don't really know if I want to do that. Let me go fight a mandatory. Let me do whatever, and just kind of coast by. And so I respect when I like this, Mike Coppinger wrote about this, and it's very true. We're kind of seeing a trend of a lot of guys are wanting to be undisputed. We saw that with Josh Taylor and Jose Ramirez. We're seeing that with Canelo, and we saw that with Bud Crawford a few years ago. And it's so good for the sport and for casual fans to be able to point to one guy, say that guy is the best. And so, and so that was a fun interview as well. And and that's fun. You want to be able to kind of stand your ground a little bit, go back and forth. Nobody gets their feelings hurt. And that's you all have a good time.
Right, absolutely. And then transitioning to that fight this past Saturday, the 17th of July, from the AT&T Center in San Antonio, Texas, on Showtime for the WBC, WBA, IBF, and WBO Super Welterweight World Titles. Jermell Charlo and Brian Castano each fight to a split draw. I don't know about you, Ben, and you give us your take, but I thought it was a great fight. It was very competitive. And I think that one scorecard that I think gave 9 rounds to Jermell Charlo, I believe it was a 9 rounds to 3, 117, 111. I think that really took away from the competitiveness and how good the fight was. What did you think overall about the fight?
Yeah, I pretty much wrote that for ESPN.com, and it's unfortunate that Nelson Vasquez can't see straight and doesn't really know how to fill out a boxing scorecard. I mean, he was better off doing I covered a fight when I worked for the Express News. I covered a fight in a renovated Kmart. And I think Nelson Vasquez needs to be covering fights over there if he's going to call that 117, 111. And for the record, the next time we see him covering a major fight, somebody better ask the promoter, why is he involved? Why was he not scratched? Because he doesn't need to be around a title fight if he can't give an explanation for that card, number one. Number two, I think you saw that Castano, like I said, 154 has always been a very topsy-turvy division. Nobody's really been able to hold a belt for a really long time in that division. We've seen a lot of turnover, specifically within all that PBC umbrella. And I thought at the very minimum, we now know who the two best at 154 are. I think Jermell Charlo and Brian Castano are the two best. I think a rematch makes a ton of sense. And honestly, I thought it was an excellent fight. I think it's a fight of the year candidate by far. It's what you want to see in boxing. You want to see guys taking risks. We saw both guys hurt, both guys taking big shots, delivering big shots, rallying. It's everything you love about boxing. And so, aside from that scorecard, I have no qualms with the draw. I had it 115, 113 Castano, and that's with Castano stealing a couple rounds. And if you're a judge and you maybe say, depending on how you score rounds, if you go, yeah, maybe I liked all the work at the beginning, and what happened in the last 30 seconds isn't enough to give that round to Brian, then I can see how you could give Charlo even 115, 113 his way at most. So, but it was a close fight. I think a draw is probably it's not I don't think that's a terrible outcome. I can see how you could get there. But by and large, it was a good fight. I thought both guys' stock relatively improved. We get a rematch. I think for Jermell, that's the best option for him, is to get a rematch and produce another one of those kind of exciting fights, because your fan, as much as you grow your fan base in boxing by winning, you grow your fan base by putting on great performances and compelling performances. And when I feel like what we don't see in boxing a lot of is boxers don't create feelings in the ring. They don't. I think when boxers are great, they create an emotion out of fans. Fans feel like you should want a standing ovation in the 12th round every fight. And if you're not getting that, it doesn't matter if you win. I don't think you did your job as a prize fighter. And at the end of that round, at the end of that fight, I think that's what you look for. And so, I think that there are going to be some people who are on the fence about Jermell who really like watching him. I think he's an incredibly flawed fighter, and we saw that. But those flaws make him really exciting, which is good. We can't expect everybody to be perfect. And I thought that it was a really great card by Showtime, and they did a phenomenal job all the way through.
And do you think judges and referees should be made to speak to the media to explain their decisions when something like this crops up?
100%. 100%. I think it's up to the commission to mandate that. I think it's up to promoters and it's up to the media. But, frankly, it's our job to go out and push them. And COP did a really good job of trying to get the commission to comment on that scorecard. They said no comment. And if I'm the Texas commission, it's another black eye. There's already a bunch of running jokes about how things are a sham in Texas, and stuff like this does not help you. And that's my home state. And I hate that that's the case. But that's the truth of the matter. And so, in other sports, you have pool officials or pool reporters, like say, for example, the NCAA, the March Madness tournament. Like if there is something that goes completely haywire, there is one reporter who is tasked with going and getting the explanation for what happened. And the referee will give the explanation and then we move on. But they will have to account for it. And so I think that would be very welcomed in boxing, especially when transparency isn't always there. You want to be able to tell fans and tell people you have a legitimate product, that you don't have a guy who was half asleep the whole fight and just kind of had the card filled out beforehand. And so I would love to know why he gave that to 117, 111 to Charlo. And Nelson Vasquez may be a good guy. He may just had a bad night. All of those things may have happened. But I think when you fill out a card that everybody feels like is egregious, you need to explain it.
And also, do you think, in baseball, in soccer over in the UK, when a referee has a bad day or, a few bad matches, they demote them. They go to the minor leagues again, and then they kind of have to work their way back up, to show that they're credible and they can do the job. You think that's something that they can look at? Because obviously we have God knows how many small hall shows throughout the country.
Yeah, I think that would be a better question for some of these promoters and for some of the sanctioning bodies and the commissions themselves. And I think the question is, how many elite referees or officials do we have in boxing? Because while you are correct that there are a lot of other shows, a lot of club shows, I would love to see the numbers on how many club shows there are now compared to maybe 2011. And I'm talking about, cards that maybe have a regional audience that are kind of big in different places, not necessarily big network cards, but those are where you're going to get you're going to cut your teeth or maybe you get on the undercard and put some work in. But I would agree there has to be some punishment, like in other sports. Like if you're in American football, for example, same way like in soccer, if you're not cutting it, you will be demoted and you will be replaced. And that is very, very true. And I think referees judges have a very tough job. It is not easy, especially live. When you're ringside, it is so much faster. Watching the sports on TV, it's so much easier to do. You got the benefit of replay. Everything is happening right. It's a lot slower when it's coming through your TV than it is in real time. So it is a very difficult job. But on the other side, they're professionals, and that is their duty. So if they can't do it, then maybe somebody else underneath them can. So I think that is something that should be explored and looked at. And I think us and boxing media have always got to be asking these type of questions, saying how can we make the sport better? Because there is no commissioner, there is no central governing body. So it's up to the fans and the media to dictate what kind of product they're willing to take. And so, there is a lot of benefits in that we can basically dictate a lot of, what we want, changes we want to see in the sport. But that's also a pressure and a burden on us that doesn't really exist in other major sports.
Ben, what's your take on 10-8 individual round scorecards? Because I believe one of the judges, it was one of them who scored it, I think 114, 113, had one of the rounds, I don't know if it was the 8th round or one of the middle rounds.
10th, I think it was the Charlo where he did everything but drop Castano, I believe.
Right.
It was the 10th.
Yeah, that's it.
So what's your take on that, Ben? When there's no knockdown because it's a rarity we see in boxing. You never see too many 10-8 rounds when there's no knockdown. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it is. It's very rare. We've seen it before, but like you said, it is very, very rare. I could see the argument both ways. I think it depends on the judge. I think that Castano earned the benefit of the doubt because it's only two things. It's either he goes to if he's really getting hit that bad without going down, then you have to say, should the fight be stopped? If the referee determines that the fight should continue and he didn't go down, I wouldn't punish the fighter for getting licked if he kept his knee up, if he didn't touch the canvas. I think that he should be rewarded with the 10-9 round. But I know that there is a school of thought and a philosophy that just because someone doesn't go down doesn't mean it's not a 10-8 round. But then at what point do you say, well, why not a 10-7 round? Do you think you should have went down twice? Why not go there? But it's interesting, like in the UK, we see a lot of 10-10 rounds. Like it's very much a thing over there. Or you see, and I think that's kind of lazy judging. I think you should be forced to pick a winner of the round. And even if there's not a whole lot, you should have a set of criteria as to what you kind of filter through whenever it's that tie. Because I have a bigger problem with the 10-10 rounds with the 10-8 round, because I can understand the logic behind a 10-8 round, but a 10-10 round, that doesn't make a ton of sense to me. But we see those a lot in the UK, which I find fascinating.
And I do wonder if, I know in Vegas, in California, a lot of the judges and some of the referees actually cover both sports. They cover MMA and they also cover boxing. I do wonder if that's creeped over from MMA, because if they have a dominant round, sometimes they will score it 10-8, because obviously there's no such thing really as a knockdown in UFC, because it's just part of the game, right?
Right. And that's a very fair point, and that's also why, honestly, I don't like UFC. I've never been able to get into MMA. I just can't do it. I think the knockdown is the most beautiful thing in sports. I think it's like a microcosm of life. And I know it's a very weird, like a strange tangent that we just went on here, but I'm going to finish it. I feel like in life you get knocked down and you basically have to ask yourself, do I want to keep going? Do I want to continue? Can I battle back from this? Whatever the setback is in life. And boxing, in the MMA, you don't get that chance. If you get knocked down, if someone gets a good position on you and wails on you, that's over. You don't get the chance to answer. And in boxing, think about all the great drama we've had. Some of our favorite fights where guys got off the canvas. The prime example is Charlo-Castano won. And also another tangent. I have an undefeated amateur record of 1-0. I lost my USA Boxing Passbook a long time ago. I did a fraternity fight night in college my last year, and I was so out of shape. I did not train for it. And by the third round, I remember there were 3 1-minute rounds, and I went to my trainer after the second round. I think I broke the guy's nose in the second round, but I was gassed. I couldn't go. I just hit him with a bunch of uppercuts, and I was gassed. And I was like, I said, I'm done. And the trainer's like, no, you're going back out there. And so once I went back out, I saw the blood and I threw a couple punches. I did what Corrales did, and I spit out the mouthpiece because I knew I'd get the extra 10 seconds. And so I got the reprieve. I hung around, and that was it. But now to go back to the original question, which is, has that crept over? That is a fascinating situation. But I will argue that the 10-8s have been around probably for that philosophy. It's more of an old school philosophy, if we really want to be honest. So that may predate a lot of MMA and UFC, but that is, while it's rare, it's still, we do see it from time to time. So I get both sides of it, but I don't think that the fighters should be penalized if they don't go down.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting point that, when it does happen, it's interesting to dive in and analyze it. So, because it is rare, like I mentioned. So, we'll see how it continues moving forward here in the sport. Also on that card, Rolando Rolly Romero remains undefeated, 14-0 with the 7th round TKO over Anthony Yiggett. This was for Romero's WBA interim lightweight title. Ben, are you familiar with Romero? I know at least to us, he seemed to get a lot of attention when he started calling out Ryan Garcia and posted some sparring footage from years ago that him and Ryan sparred at the Mayweather boxing gym in Las Vegas. Are you familiar with Romero? And if you are, what'd you think about his matchup?
I am. I have not been impressed with him. I was once again not impressed with Rolando Romero. I do not understand the hype. I think that he has a lot to work on. Very raw. I know we got the TKO over Yiggett, but let's go back. I'd have to go back and look exactly what round it was. Let me go ahead and just pull up box record here while I have it, because Romero was deducted in round 5 for hitting on the break. It was an illegal punch, and if you go back and look, Yiggett was not really this. He went down in that round, and then he went down in round 7. I have a hunch and I have a suspicion that Yiggett was not the same after that illegal blow. He never really recovered, and then he got knocked down, and then it was over from there. And up until that point, Romero was fighting. Yiggett was complaining about an elbow that was thrown. We saw some rough housing, and Romero was just not polished. And if you're a fighter of that kind of caliber, you don't need to be rough housing. You don't need to be throwing dirty shots. Just go in and do your job. And this is not the first time that we've had these questions about Rolando Romero. I believe that there was a fight of his, I want to say last year or maybe the year before, that was the Jackson Marinas fight, where a lot of people wondered if he lost. And I think the judging was pretty bad that night. I thought he lost that fight. And if, depending on how, if Yiggett, looked like he did early on, I thought Yiggett was doing some good things, was boxing really well. And I was not impressed with Romero, and I didn't see it, and I still don't see it. And he's got a lot of work to do. I kind of said the same thing about Tank when he was on the Mayweather-McGregor undercard. He tried the Roy Jones Jr., the behind the back, and then the weave, and just completely missed. I'm like, listen, buddy, like, chill out. You got some ways to go. But to Tank's credit, he has improved tremendously over time. He's gotten more impressive. So Romero can do it. He's only, I think he's only 25. But what we saw against that level of competition, to be fair, Yiggett was overweight, a late replacement. It was a tough task. But by and large, if you take the fight, you take the fight. And what we saw technically from Romero, just not impressed. And I do want to see more from him if we were going to take him seriously. And I think he called out Tank or whoever. Somebody good. And I'm like, listen, buddy, slow your roll. Like, I know you want the easy paycheck. You want that to come easy, but you got to earn those dollars, and you got to earn the way to get those fights. And right now, I just don't think he's anywhere near ready for that.
So you mentioned the four princes within that division, Ben, Garcia, Lopez, Haney, Tank. Do you think Romero loses to all of them right now?
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, that's not even a question. I mean, that's right. I think Devin Haney, basically shoe shines him. Granted, I may not be the most entertaining, but he shoe shines him for 20 rounds. I think all of the rest of them just play with it. He's not. If you look at his resume, nothing is impressive. All of those guys were taking step-up fights, and here he is hitting, fighting dirty against Anthony Yiggett and winning on a TKO after an illegal punch, and having lost to a guy that a lot of us think that he lost to Jackson Marinas. The four princes ain't losing to those guys right now. So Romero's got a lot of work to do, and like I said, it can be done, but I am not on the Rolando Romero hype train. And it's kind of a trend in boxing we're seeing where promotional companies and managers and fighters, they're all wanting to fast track the process, and we're seeing guys who are probably, let me find the best way to put this. Like, we weren't seeing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe 10 years ago even, we weren't seeing 8-round card fights as the main event. And Ryan Garcia, we've seen some 8-round main events. We've seen that with some other guys. Maybe a guy like Teofimo Lopez, being the main event on a card, when he's not fighting for a belt, anything like that on a major network card. We're not really seeing that. And we're seeing this rush to kind of push guys through faster, get them all the fights, really accelerate their careers. When A, that may not be in their best interest, and B, we don't really know where their skill set's at. Historically, these guys may have been buried on an undercard on a card sheet that maybe had 3 title fights. Like, they were not the co-main. Like, Rolando Romero should never be in a co-main. Like that, he's not at that caliber. And but it's not exclusive to Showtime. We see that with Top Rank. We see that with DAZN. We see that across the board. Every promotional company, this is a trend where guys who shouldn't be basically on featured bouts are in featured bouts, when really, like Edgar Berlanga is a prime example. Berlanga is a prospect still, and he's being marketed as a top draw. And, he's had the knockout streak that finally ended. I think Top Rank's done a very good job of marketing him. I think it's incredibly gimmicky, but it doesn't matter because it works. Because a lot of people, like when we were out there for Canelo BJS, like people were shouting for Berlanga, and I was like, oh, this is real. So, good for Edgar, and good for, all of the, people that are working with him, and Keith Connolly, his manager, and sorts of that nature. But I just think that you're seeing a lot of those types, guys getting rushed, and Romero I would put in that category. Like, he needs to kind of take a step back, really, instead of calling out big names, really wonder, why am I struggling with Anthony Yiggett? Why did I struggle with Jackson Marinas? Like, what's going on here where I'm not breaking through. And I think if he's answering those questions, then he'll get those fights and maybe he'll be competitive in those.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with your sentiment, Ben. I think his hype is a lot larger right now than his actual talent in the ring. So he still has some things to prove. He has to get in there with a contender, somebody who's proven at 135 pounds, and see what we can do. If he dominates them or whatever, then it'd be a different story. I feel like, the opinions on him would change, but we'll see how his next fight turns about as he moves forward. Also on that card, Amilcar Vidal gets a majority decision win over Emmanuel Alim. Mike, did you catch this fight? And if you did, what'd you think?
Yeah, it was a good fight. It was a close fight. Really kind of depended on what you thought, because you could see afterwards that Alim was. I think Alim's team thought he'd taken it. What do you call it? Vidal. I thought he was good, heavy-handed. I would imagine they may try to run it back due to the controversial scorecards, but it was good. It was a more entertaining fight than the Romero Yigit, which was definitely more of a street fight than a boxing contest.
Right. Yeah, I could agree with that. Ben, did you catch that fight?
I did. I think that was probably worse scoring than Castano Charlo, if we're being quite honest, because I could see a draw in that fight. I do not see how Vidal won that fight. Vidal also wildly unimpressive. I think that with a smaller guy, he was the bigger guy, and he was this longer. Alim much shorter. Vidal should have been able to pick him apart. Instead, Alim was on the inside hitting him with uppercuts. That should never happen. Again, with that kind of, that reach disadvantage, if a guy is putting in that kind of work on the inside, that says volumes about the bigger man. And Vidal just looks slow, didn't set anything up. You saw a bunch of just one punch. It was kind of really elementary, his attack. He telegraphed everything. Alim kind of figured it out. I think he suffered from being significantly smaller than Vidal. We saw that, and that was a significant disadvantage that you had to fight against. But I don't really know, what to make of Vidal. I want to see him. I think that was the first time I really saw him and caught a glimpse of him. But what you saw, I think that he needs to be much faster. I think he needs to throw more in bunches. He doesn't have the power to be a one-punch guy. I think we saw that. If you can't put down a guy like Alim, who's much smaller than you, you're not going to do it with a guy of your size. So he needs to really go back to the drawing board and work on that skill set, because what I saw, granted, I get ripped in the ESPN slack because I think I have a very high standard for who I consider good, which is fine, because if I'm a boxing fan and I'm going to spend my Saturday night and basically say, oh yeah, honey, like with my wife, like, yeah, we're going to put date night on hold this week. There's a good fight on. If I'm going to get yelled at, it's going to be for a good reason. Or, if I'm going to bank that Saturday night as, burn that card, that coupon, and married folks will know what I'm talking about. If I'm burning that coupon, I want it to be for, I want to watch a good fight. And I think boxing fans deserve good quality fights. And so when we watch stinkers or guys who aren't that good being told, when they're telling us, oh, this guy's good, but he's not good, like boxing, you can see through it. I mean, that's one of the beautiful, boxing, you can't hide. You can't hide in a boxing ring. There's only, everybody can look into it. It's everything happens right in front of you, and there's nowhere to run in the ring. Like if you're bad, you're bad. And with Vidal, like you saw, like he just didn't have the power. I think I wish he would have boxed a little bit more. I thought Ronnie Shields did a really good job with Alim. And honestly, if I'm taking who's got the higher stock out of the fight, it's Alim. I think Alim, there's more room for him to grow. I think the size is going to be an issue. But he found ways to counter that, especially with somebody who was lazy like Vidal, who led him on the inside. If you have that kind of, like I said, it frustrates me to no end when bigger guys just don't jab and do boxing fundamentals. Like if you've got the size, just use a stick, keep the guy on the outside, and just call it a day. And it's really not rocket science; it's boxing. So it was an entertaining fight. I thought it was a good fight. Like I said, Showtime did a really good job with that whole card. But Vidal, I thought should not have gotten the win.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that sentiment as well. Moving on to fight previews this upcoming Saturday, the 24th of July, from the Wembley Arena in London on Fight TV. Joe Joyce, 12-0, goes up against Charlo-Castano for their WBC Silver and WBO International Heavyweight titles. This is Joyce's first fight back, I believe, since his stoppage win over Daniel Dubois. What do you think about Joe Joyce, Ben?
Before you start, would you use a coupon for this?
I would not. I would not use a coupon. This is I'm saying, honey, we're going out. Let's go get dinner. Let's do this because guess what? I got Spence Pacquiao coming up. We've got other good fights coming up this summer, so I'm not burning a coupon on Joyce-Takam. And it's not really in. And I enjoyed Joyce Dubois. I thought that was actually a really fascinating match because Dubois was really winning rounds and he was up on the scorecards. But Joyce he's just using that jab and just really putting in. It was almost like working to the body, but instead he was working Dubois' eye. It was like, you say, in the later rounds, that body work's going to pay off. Well, in this case, he was just using the jab so well that eventually the fight just no longer could continue. And I thought that was actually a really beautiful game plan that worked out. So it's really not a knock on Joe Joyce. I just don't think I don't really know what the ceiling is for either one of these guys. I don't think that either one of these guys are top heavyweights. I think that Takam is like 40 years old. He's got 5 losses. I don't really know what we're going to see from him. I expect Joyce will be the heavy favorite, as he should be every time Takam's had to step up. He's basically just been an opponent that he's that guy that promoters use fans have heard of him. So he'll sell, but he's not going to win. So he's perfect. He's a perfect opponent. I've heard of that guy. He's like Gabe Rosado. I've heard of that guy. He's probably going to lose. And then, Rosado does something like he does and beat Beck the Bully, which is great. The world needs more Gabe Rosados. But I just don't know when you look at the heavyweight realm, what's the point? What's next? And when boxing, we always ask, well, what's next? And what is Joe Joyce going to show me tonight or Saturday that I don't already think I'm going to know about him? And so, we'll see. Maybe he changes my mind and does well, but I will catch the highlights later. And this will not be a coupon night for me. No.
Mike, what do you think about the fight with Takam?
Yeah, I think Ben summed it up really well. I honestly think Takam is tailor-made. Good opponent, kind of Chisora-esque, just kind of comes towards you. And after seeing what Joe Joyce did to Daniel Dubois with that jab, I don't see Takam lasting the full 12 rounds. To be fair to him, he did have a full camp this time. Takam is the sort of heavyweight that kind of just gets called up after, on a 4 or 5 weeks notice. Whereas for this one, he has had a full camp. So, maybe we may see a bit of a better performance for him, because it's really, it's win-win. He wins this and I think he becomes a WBO mandatory. So maybe Takam's like, you know what? I'll do the full 12 weeks. I'll go in, I'll try to win instead of, this kind of really turning up for a paycheck. But a good Joe Joyce, Daniel Dubois, Joe Joyce, I think he gets the win. He has such an awkward style and he looks so slow, but it's effective when it works.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. Moving on to the news and notes section of the episode. Ben, as you know, this weekend, this Saturday specifically, was supposed to be Tyson Fury against Deontay Wilder 3, but it was obviously canceled. They reported that Fury came down with COVID and then, other situations involved.
Recovered quick and went car shopping.
Yeah, it seemed to recover quick. Ben, what's the latest, obviously since this would be a joint pay-per-view between Fox and ESPN, from your side, what's the latest news on this? Are we going to see it before the end of the year or what's going on?
Yeah, I believe Mike Coppinger's ESPN's Mike Coppinger's reported that it will happen this fall. And let's be honest, there's no getting around it if you're Top Rank. If you wanted to move on to a Fury Joshua fight, which I'm sure everybody wanted to do, right now whenever the arbitrator ruled in your favor, you're not getting out of that. There's no amount of boxing politics that's going to get you out of, a legal laws that Top Rank took. So they've got to do the fight. It's got to happen. It's in the contract. So, everybody's reported, Tyson Fury's COVID situation. I know there's been a lot of speculation until there's anything to report. Otherwise, you've got to stick with what has been confirmed and what we believe is accurate. And to be honest, Fury, I was in the room when he did the podcast with Eddie Hearn in Arlington for Canelo BJS. And, he said, I got his mojo in my pocket. And he's right. He's 100% right. I mean, Fury's not scared of Deontay Wilder. He's been in camp. He was out there. He was putting in, round work with Billy Joe ahead of this. We've seen him training. And to be honest, I don't think he's going to really, he knows the blueprint and he knows what's going on. And he's really, I think both sides are looking forward, him and Eddie Hearn, both looking forward to that Fury-Joshua fight. So, I don't think that Fury is ducking or needs extra time to face Wilder. I just that seems kind of ludicrous given how Wilder was handled in the rematch. So, I think right now we're all seeing, we obviously saw that Matchroom announced the Alexander Usyk, Anthony Joshua fight, which I think is a dangerous fight for Anthony Joshua, a very dangerous fight. And that's a big risk that may end up undoing everything. A lot of people don't think a whole lot of Alexander Usyk at heavyweight, but that could be a problem. And really mess up a lot of people's money. And then Matchroom and Top Rank are going, well, maybe we should have handled this thing earlier and then maybe not had this thing ruminate for so long.
Ben, when you saw those pictures of Tyson Fury, obviously with fans in the hotels and stuff like that, and then you went car shopping and they put a picture on the website, did you or Mike obviously see those and think to yourself, hey, we could have a good story here about maybe a fake COVID case or something? And did you put your detective hat on and off you go?
Yeah, I think that everyone is always spectacle in boxing, especially I can't remember who it was. So when I was in San Antonio, I want to say it was Mikey Garcia. I don't want to slander Mikey unnecessarily, but there was somebody who was supposed to fight at the AT&T Center, which is where the San Antonio Spurs play. It's where they had Charlo-Castano. It's the biggest arena in town, aside from the Alamo Dome, where Canelo's fought before. But it's the biggest arena that's not a stadium. And somebody pulled out with an injury. I can't remember what the fight was. Well, when they remade the fight, they did it at the Freeman Coliseum, which is significantly smaller. And I was just like, I wonder why they ended up having an injury and then they go to a smaller venue. That screams to me maybe they didn't get the tickets they needed to kind of pull out. So, that kind of situation, you wonder, okay, well, whatever. And I thought it was an interesting note. I'm not going to say it was a fake case or anything like that. I will just say I thought it was interesting that in Mike's reporting, he pointed out that they were going to get additional publicity through the football weekends for this fight, which is going to help the pay-per-views a lot. But I think this fight will, this is a weird fight. It's obviously been thrust on a lot of people. It's I don't think it's in anybody's best interest, but it's contractually there for Wilder to take. So he's going to take it. I don't really know. I guess he needs the fight as much as anybody, but I don't really know what it's going to change. I think we all know I think we all have a hunch as to what's going to happen. But, I think that, when you see that, I don't fault, if what we believe to be is true with Fury. And honestly, I could see Tyson Fury being the type of guy to say, yeah, maybe I test negative. I'm just going to go around and do whatever. It's Tyson Fury. You can't, the heavyweight champion of the world can basically beat up anybody on the planet. So who's to tell him what he can and can't do, even if it may be a little reckless. But that close, testing positive, that close to a fight, if that's indeed the case, which we think it is, can be a problem. I think a prime example of this was Jamel Herring last year, tested positive for COVID. And then I can't remember who the opponent was, but Jamel just did not look very good. And I talked to his trainer, Brian McIntyre, and Bomac basically said that they were kind of like, it sounded like he said, oh yeah, we're in a good place. But, it sounded like the way they were ramping up, it just maybe was a little too early. And it was Jonathan Oquendo. It was the Herring Oquendo fight. And I thought Herring straight up quit that fight. I think I wrote it. I said, and Bomac hasn't called me back since, but it's true. I thought Herring quit. When we wrote that on ESPN, I was like, he looked for the easy way out, and maybe that COVID situation played a role in it. And with this much money on the line, and Deontay Wilder's still a live opponent, still has a right hand that can really put you down if it hits you right. Who's to say Tyson Fury gets up from that again if he gets hit the right way? And so, if you do think that that's going to be an issue, it's not worth risking a potential a mega fight with AJ if you end up losing this and it hurts your cachet, and then you've got to go get the belts back and all of this. So, I could see the reasoning for pushing this fight back just from the Fury camp, just to be totally sure.
Ben, since we're talking about Top Rank and ESPN and their kind of link up, I'm sure people listening to this are going to be like, well, of course, Ben's going to agree with Tyson. He's with Top Rank, who are with ESPN. How much freedom do you get in what you write? Like, can you just put anything forward and it's accepted? Or have you ever put anything and they've kind of said, we have an affiliation with Top Rank. You can't really write that, Ben?
Yeah, I'll put it this way. My phone hasn't rang yet that I've been too critical of people and from anybody. It's been, whether that's Showtime, PBC, Golden Boy, Top Rank. Nobody said, we're doing this. And I think that, I've been plenty critical of Top Rank fighters. I've said, like I said, I thought Jamel quit against Oquendo. I thought there have been some cards and I'm like, oh, that card's not very good. In some of these fighters that Top Rank has. I think Top Rank and PBC have the same problem. Sometimes they silo their fighters, and I don't really know how good they are because they're fighting. It's basically this created ecosystem for them. They're not really being challenged. So you're going to tell me a guy at Top Rank's really good or a guy at PBC's really good, and I think for Bob Heyman or for Al Heyman and Bob Arum, it's the same question. Well, they fight your guys. If you put them against somebody from the other side, how are they going to look? And so that's going to be, I think that's, I ask those questions all the time. And, so no, I haven't had any pushback. I think, ESPN's done a good job of maintaining that balance between, the TV side on kind of the programming side and what we do on the .com side. So I think that's kind of the best way for us to operate. And so we haven't had any issues of saying, a lot of people think that we put Bud Crawford as our number one just for the because he's the top ranked guy. And, but Canelo's up there now, and we've been pretty fair with some of these guys, and Tio had to earn his way up there with Vasily. And and I'll be honest, like you can ask the people in our ESPN Slack channel about what I think about some top ranked fighters and when I don't think they're very good. Like one Joe Smith Jr. Like I do not think that Joe Smith is it at 175, but he's got a belt. We'll see what happens. And fighters know as well. I'm not afraid to be like, this is why I don't think you are, and you have the reasons why. And it's the same thing with like American football coaches are the same way. And I'm like, listen, I think you've got to stand your ground, but as long as you have the reasoning for it, you can't just make up something. Be like, oh, I don't like Tank Davis just because, or I don't like Jamal Charlo just because, or Joe Smith just because. You've got to have reasoning as to why you think that. You can't just put out a random opinion with no back behind it. Boxing fans are smart enough that if you just make up some stuff to justify what you're thinking, they'll see right through it. So. We've all been wanting Bud Crawford to take some better fights, and we've wanted, PBC we want Spence Crawford to happen. We're fight fans too, and we want what's good for fight fans is good for the industry, everybody in the industry, because that's kind of how the whole thing works. So, I very much, and especially in boxing right now, and I think media is required to kind of be the truth tellers in boxing, and we have a platform at ESPN. And that's what I love about my position right now is that I kind of have the liberty to say, you know what, this doesn't smell right. This needs to be better. This shouldn't be operating this way, or, this company needs to stop, kind of get this together, because like I said, there is no commissioner. There's nobody to put pressure on anybody. So the only way that pressure is going to come is from the public. And if we feel like something isn't what it needs to be, I think it's for boxing fans, it's our duty to serve them, our readers, to say, hey, this isn't right. Whatever that may be. If that means that we don't get access to somebody else, fine, so be it. If you want to run that route, then that's fine. That's their prerogative. But I think if we really want to do what's best for boxing, it's to call a spade and tell the truth, because, boxing a lot of times, there's really no oversight and you can do whatever you want. And so the last resort is for media to be brutally honest, no matter their promotional affiliation, because that's not only, good for our business, but it's good for the business at whole.
Some recent news also, I think that was reported, I believe today or sometime this week, from your colleague at ESPN, Mike Coppinger, said that Canelo Alvarez and Caleb Plant are close to a September fight that's likely to be on Fox pay-per-view in Las Vegas. What's your take on that fight, and what's the latest news from what you know?
Yeah, first off, Cop is just crushing it, man. We were we had a meeting yesterday at 2:00, and we're sitting there, and we had like a weekly boxing meeting, and Cop's like, we're on Zoom. We're like, hey, hold on a sec, I got to break this Canelo Plant story. And so he's just saying, he's like, we're having the meeting. He's just doing that. So Cop's, I'm really happy to have Mike on board. He's been doing a great job, and yeah, I think it's. Canelo should be applauded for going and trying to, become the undisputed champion at 168. It's something that he's been really vocal about. So in Caleb Plant, I'm sure PBC's thrilled to have, Canelo on their airwaves. He's going to make them a ton of money. I do not think Caleb Plant has a shot in hell of winning. I basically wrote that on. I think it's going to take a lot of things to go really, really well for him. I think he has Mike and I were talking about this. Like, Caleb Plant isn't a bad fighter. It's not that Caleb Plant is bad. It's that Canelo is really, 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 really good. And the issue that Billy Joe had, I think Caleb Plant has to an extent, is that I don't really trust Caleb Plant's power to really give Canelo problems. And if there's the one thing that we learned out of the Canelo Triple G fights, is that Canelo has a very strong chin. And if you can take that punishment from Triple G and handle that pretty well, it's going to take a lot for, Canelo can pretty much say, I'll walk through your punch and go through you. And I thought, had Billy Joe not gotten hurt or taken the beating he did, I think that eventually Canelo would have said he didn't care. He just said, I'm just going to walk it down and go through it. Yeah. I don't think Caleb Plant's got the power. However, I think Billy Joe is giving Caleb the blueprint on how to beat Canelo, and that if you can be slick and you can stick and move and be on the outside, pick your shots and stack rounds early and maybe build a good lead, there's a chance that you could beat Canelo. You make Canelo push, you counter, you kind of let that play into itself, and that is going to be the best route for Caleb Plant to win that fight. And Canelo's hittable. We've seen that throughout his career. He's improved his defense, his counterpunching, his slips, his head movement, but he's still very much a hittable target. We've seen that if you're a good enough fighter. And I think Caleb Plant, like I said, it's not a knock on Caleb Plant. I don't think he has a shot. I think Canelo's just that good. And I just don't know, if Caleb Plant has the goods. We look at his resume again. We see it against a lot of, PBC guys. He's got a couple good wins. I think the last fight, Caleb Truax, he was a heavy favorite. Truax went the distance, and that's not good. If I'm Caleb Plant, I don't feel good that a guy like Caleb Truax went the distance, and I got to go face Canelo and really scare Canelo. Like if I'm Canelo, I'm looking at Caleb Plant and go, am I scared? No. He'd probably be scared of Arthur Beterbiev if he goes up to 175, or Jamal Charlo, or even Triple G might scare him a little bit still. But Caleb Plant, I just don't think does that. And I'm sorry, Caleb Plant, if you're listening, but if you prove me wrong, I'll be more than happy to come back on and eat my words. But I think that's going to be very difficult for Caleb to pull that out.
Also, recent news that's been reported this week as well. I believe ESPN reported as well. Oscar De La Hoya and Vitor Belfort. It was supposed to be an exhibition initially, and now it's, I guess, an actual professional fight. What's your take on these types of fights? Obviously you include like the Logan Pauls and then the YouTube stars, and then you have, former retired fighter legend as in Oscar De La Hoya coming in to get a piece of that pie. What's your take on that?
I think they're fine to a degree. I think it's more of an indictment that if fans want to watch that means boxing isn't doing its job and giving people, fights they actually want to watch. And fans are going to say, well, we'll say it with our dollars. If you don't want to give us, if you don't want to make the Spence Crawfords of the world and the AJ Fury, and those kind of fights, then guess what? We're going to go find other stuff to stay entertained. And if two yokels want to go out and hit themselves a couple times and for our entertainment, so be it. And, they are entertaining cards, no matter what you think. And, I honestly think Jake Paul has a chance to be kind of decent. It's kind of terrifying to say that. But when you look at him from his skill standpoint, how much he's improved and the work he's put in, he's actually looking pretty solid technically. And I want to see him fight against Woodley and see what he does. I'm curious to see what the ceiling is for Jake Paul because he's clearly got some chops to him, and I kind of want to see him tested at some point. I'm not saying that he's going to be a world champion or anything like that, but I think that he's probably a little bit better than people give him credit for. That being said, Oscar, if you're listening, please stop. What are you doing, my guy? You just had Canelo walk away from you. You're probably about to lose Ryan Garcia. And now you're sitting here bringing back your career. When you look at it, Golden Boy and Top Rank were the two top promotions in boxing. Now we have Matchroom that came in, ate Oscar's lunch at DAZN. Matchroom and DAZN just struck that big deal. Matchroom is now going into Mexico and rubbing that in Oscar's face. Oh, and also I've got Canelo. And so what is it? What is Oscar doing? If I'm Oscar De La Hoya, the last thing I'm doing is trying to go get on fights and go fight old UFC stars. I'm trying to figure out, why is my promotional company the way it is? And the sad part is he has the best prospect in boxing, Virgil Ortiz. Virgil Ortiz is a bad dude and should be marketed much better, and is probably, I know we talked about the Four Princes. I'll tell you what, Virgil Ortiz might have the highest ceiling out of all of them. That dude, he said, I want to fight. He's also from the Dallas-Fort Worth area where I'm from. Him and Errol Spence grew up, maybe 20 minutes from each other. Both had the same trainer at one point in time, Gene Vivero, in South Dallas. Like, I think, he said, I want to go fight Errol at 154 like that. We've talked about that. That's going to be a fight that happens. I'll tell you what, that's going to be a pick'em fight in a couple of years. And that's going to put, you may get 60,000 people in there, and Canelo had 70,000 for his fight against BJS, but that fight is going to do numbers. And Virgil is the most, if I had to buy $100, if you gave me $100 to buy stock in anybody, I'm buying it in Virgil Ortiz. He's tremendous. So if I'm Oscar De La Hoya, I've got a lot of other issues that I've got to worry about instead of making money in a side fight that nobody's probably going to watch because people don't care about Oscar like that. It's just not the case. And so, it's different. Floyd has his Mayweather promotion is going fine. The Paul brothers, that's kind of their thing, whatever. But Oscar, Golden Boy, is kind of in shambles. And instead of tending to his business, he's like, my wife and I are getting really into like bar rescue. Like, I watched a lot when I was in college. I don't know if you're familiar with the show. Basically, it's John Taffer just runs in, yells at a bunch of bad bars, and like, why are you doing this? And the owners are like completely incompetent. You go, oh, that's why the bar is bad. Like, you're out here just drinking or just like playing with like customers while everything's falling apart in the kitchen. That's Oscar De La Hoya. Oscar De La Hoya needs John Taffer to run into Golden Boy Promotions. Like, what are you doing? Because you are clearly not tending to your business. And so it makes no sense. And I like the folks at Golden Boy. Oscar is a Mexican American icon, one of the best fighters of the 20th century. It's sad to see what's going on with him specifically. And like I said, I think that he has, he's probably, if we had to bet, I would say that Ryan Garcia goes with Canelo. It makes a lot of sense given the trainer connections and kind of their relationship. But Virgil Ortiz still is a superstar in the making. I mean, he is going to run through everybody he fights right now. And I would love to see him fight somebody big at 147. So I think Oscar should be worrying about all of that instead of getting in the ring to make a quick buck.
Ben, you said you're from the Dallas area. Obviously, Texas has kind of taken over in the amateurs in boxing. We've got, Errol Spence, Virgil Ortiz, Josh Franco, Bam Rodriguez. What's happening in Texas? It's not really known as a boxing hotbed.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, you've got a lot of athletes in Texas. Like, sports is a very heavy priority across the board. And, you're seeing more and more guys matriculate. And I think it's just, it is interesting. You are seeing, Golden Boy's got a few. They probably have the most, I think, Texas guys right now. And you're seeing Bam Rodriguez. I was talking to Robert Garcia. Robert Garcia loves Bam. I think he thinks the ceiling is really high for him, and he's probably one of the top guys right now in the Robert Garcia stable out of San Antonio. And you're seeing that with Errol. You're seeing that with Virgil. Maurice Hooker, like, it's funny. We used to get releases at the morning news about Maurice Hooker, and I was like, oh, it was this Mighty Mo guy. And then he goes out, and like Maurice Hooker is a great TV fighter, and that's not a knock on Maurice. Like, he's really entertaining. I thought he actually made a lot of strides under Bomac, even though he got knocked out by Virgil. I thought Maurice was good, and when he applies himself, he's a really fun fighter to watch and can really give a lot of guys problems. I don't know if there's like a big commonality. Like, Texas is so big, like it's almost like every big city can be the capital of its own state. Like, Dallas is the capital of North Texas. Houston's the capital of the coast down there. San Antonio's the capital of South Texas. El Paso's the capital of out there. Lubbock. I mean, it's just so many cultures come together. But I think in Texas, you do have a lot of athletes right now, and maybe guys who played other sports or being, maybe this isn't going to be it for you. Why don't you go into boxing? And so they're picking it up, and it's going pretty well. So, we've got, it's just, you look at basically every sport, there's a lot of guys from Texas like running the show. And it's just, I don't know what it is. I'm not going to complain. Texans are very proud of being from Texas. So, it's fun to see that. But I'm excited for Virgil Ortiz, Errol Spence at 154, like in 2024. That's going to be a blast. That's going to have a lot of fun. We'll come back on and I'll talk about that. So
sweet. You mentioned Errol Spence in August 21st. It's already been announced a couple weeks ago. He's going to be going up against and defending his titles at a welterweight against the legend Manny Pacquiao. What's your take on that fight? And when that was announced, what was your reaction?
I love it. And it's funny because Errol has been talking about fighting Manny for a very long time. I think that he was upset that Keith Thurman got the Pacquiao bag before him. But it makes sense, Errol, I think that was when we saw that there was that was a possibility, or that Manny was kind of working with PBC. This always seemed like the likely outcome, that he was going to, his goal of a PBC alignment would be to kind of boost Errol and turn him into that superstar that a lot of people think Errol can be. And Errol's got the skills for it. But Pacquiao has been quietly, he's been very impressive to do what he did against Keith Thurman, who also I've never really been impressed with Thurman, but for Pacquiao to do that, I thought was really good. And I think this is a great fight for the sport of boxing. You have Errol taking on a legendary champion like Manny Pacquiao, and you have Pacquiao who, could, if this is, there's been a lot of speculation about if this is going to be a retirement fight for him. We're seeing that conversation thrown around a lot of, callbacks that are, talking about the totality of his career. So you have to wonder, win or lose, is this it for him, or if he loses, does he take, maybe like an Andre Berto type fight that Mayweather took at the end of his career, one final win to call it a day, which, he should, I think greats should go out on a win, even if it's not against someone fantastic, but just a night for the memories, would be fantastic. But, I think that it's so great that Pacquiao is taking on this kind of challenge, because say he wanted to retire, there are plenty of schmucks at 147 he can go fight. Like, there's so many spare dudes in that division, or somebody will come up from 140 to make an easy Pacquiao payday. Like, you don't got to twist somebody's arm to do that. They'll come up and take that fight easy. But instead, Pacquiao said, at this stage of my career, I want to test myself against one of boxing's pound for pound fighters. I think that's remarkable. I mean, and, for him to want to take on that challenge, and like I said, to be fair, I should probably put this as a disclaimer. I grew up a massive Pacquiao fan. I just loved what Pacquiao did. But the reason why is what we see in this Spence fight, like his willingness to take on all comers. Like, you look at Pacquiao's resume, and it's just a list of who's who. Like, even before he moved up to 147, before he ever beat De La Hoya, fighting Marquez, fighting Barrera, fighting Morales. Like, those three alone would be a fantastic, guys now have nowhere near that level of resume. And Pacquiao just kept building. And even at the end of his career, he's willing to take on those risks. And he's not afraid of losing. And Pacquiao's everything you want in a boxer, a guy who isn't concerned. He wants to go out, put on a good performance, wants to test himself, wants to be great, and isn't afraid of losing in the process, isn't afraid of protecting his O for marketing. You know why? Because Manny Pacquiao is exciting. And even in a loss, he's still a guy who people love to see because he puts it all out there. And I think that is a better sell and better marketing than somebody who's trying to protect an O against a bunch of guys who don't move the needle. So I'm really excited for Pacquiao Spence. I think Spence will be the favorite. This should be the fight that propels him to superstardom potentially, and kind of make him a crossover figure, and really make him a boxing cash cow. It'll be really fascinating to see what happens. Maybe that sets the table for Spence Crawford. I think I'm really excited for that fight. I can't wait to see how it plays out.
And our friends Nick P and Adam Cattrall over at the Fight Disciples, who do a podcast in the UK,
BT Sport. They're with BT Sport, right?
Yeah, they also work for BT Sport doing the UFC and stuff like that. They started a campaign like #BinTheBelts. So I just want to get your opinion on all the different, belts that we see, obviously in boxing, like the WBC, like interim and gold and regular. And do you think we'll ever see a time where ESPN don't recognize those lesser belts and they just kind of talk about the fight and not it's for a WBC regular title and try to kind of push it off as a world title?
Yeah, it depends on the network and who's promoting the fighter and what you need to sell that particular card. I mean, you see, for example, Tank and Mario Barrios fighting for a 140-pound belt. We heard that was for a belt. That wasn't for an actual belt. But Showtime said it was for a belt. And ESPN and Top Rank people cover your ears. But whenever they needed to promote Tyson Fury and he didn't have a belt, they called him the lineal champion. So it was a marketing ploy. It's good for marketing to have belts. And the second that Tyson Fury picked up a real belt, he was no longer marketed as a lineal champion, even though he's still the lineal champion. Now he's the WBC champion, and that is now taking precedence. So belts are always they're a vehicle for marketing, but by and large, I completely agree that we need to get rid and basically ignore these lesser belts. I don't care if a guy has the WBA regular belt or is an interim champion or is the franchise champion or whatever. It's confusing, and the readers are confused, casual fans are confused. I like the idea of having the 4 belts, the major belts, and basically going from there, and you say, okay, those are your 4 legitimate champions. But if somebody wants to call themselves the WBA champion, but they don't have the WBA's top belt, I'm not referring to them as the WBA champion. And I like what Dan Rayfield did in his time at ESPN. He did a really good job of kind of separating those belts and saying, okay, so-and-so is an interim champion or a regular champion or whatever. Like, we don't need to recognize them. Like, fans don't need to recognize that. They can say it on TV all they want. Like for example, Showtime, did what they had to do. I'm not knocking them for doing that. It's their show. And they marketed the Barrios Tank Davis fight as a 140-pound championship fight. When a month ago, we just had the undisputed championship fight between Jose Ramirez and Josh Taylor. Like, fans aren't stupid. We all know, like, if we had to pick Tank Davis or Josh Taylor right now, I'm probably taking Josh Taylor. And so, and I would love, if Tank wants to smoke, like, let's have him do that fight. That would be great. That would be a fun fight. We're not going to get it because it's boxing, but that would be fantastic. Why not? But it's up to us. Like I said, I think we have to be the gatekeepers of the sport if we care about it. And we don't have to, I'm all for making the push. And I've said this already in our meetings. I said, we don't need to recognize this as a champion. We don't need to say Tank is a champion because he doesn't have an actual belt, at 140. He's got a real belt at 135. And the WBA does some just crazy stuff, and the WBC can do some crazy stuff. And, that's all. If they want to do that and collect, the sanctioning fees for those belts, by all means, let them make their money. But we don't have to basically water down the sport any further than it is so they can make a buck. We've got to be able to say, yeah, no, he's not a champion. Oh, this is not, this. And some guys are earning one of the 4 legitimate belts against guys who really aren't true challengers. And so we have some kind of paper champions already. We don't need more of them. And I think, like you said, I think it's good that there is this movement to basically not recognize this. And maybe the sanctioning bodies and promoters are, you know what, this is just really making fans upset. Like fans are smarter than people think they are. Media, promoters, boxers, like, fans are not dumb. And so I think that if fans continue to be upset that certain fights are being marketed as championship fights when they're not, I think we may start seeing less of that. That would be fantastic.
Absolutely. And, on that note, Ben, we know you're not on the West Coast time, so we want to make sure we're respectful of your time. We definitely appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule, to jump on here on the last round. Before we let you go, Ben, go ahead and plug, your social media accounts and where, obviously people can find your work at ESPN, but anything you got, go ahead and plug it, man. The floor is yours.
Yeah, just ESPN.com. Just go to the boxing page, just have it bookmarked. We've got a lot of good stuff up over there. I think we've done a lot of people have questioned kind of our commitment to covering boxing that's been popular on boxing Twitter over the last year. And I think if you've seen anything, I think we're as committed as anybody, hiring Mike Coppinger, having, NFL Nation reporters help out and really cover the sport in unique ways, having content for big fights, and kind of, keeping an eye on the sport and kind of, being a watchdog for the sport when needed. I think that ESPN's doing a lot of great stuff, and I'm excited to be in the mix. I think we've got a great set of fights coming up. And so I'll be tweeting along at Ben_baby on Twitter. Hopefully doing some good analysis with Mike over on the website. And I'm excited. I think boxing is it's in a better place than it's been in quite some time. We're seeing more good fights being made. We're seeing people being willing to cross the street, and we're seeing fans get smarter. Everybody just go out and let's put the best product out there, and everybody wins. And so I'm excited. I think we all love watching good fights. I can't wait I've got my stack of coupons that I'm going to be burning and saying, hey, we got a good fight coming up this weekend. Let's go ahead and watch it. And I, the goal is maybe the wife becomes slightly a fight fan. So we say, you know what, maybe I don't got to burn coupons anymore. Maybe that's just date night. Hey, there's a good fight. Let's watch it. So I'm excited. I think that, boxing is alive and well, and we're going to see a lot of really good things in the sport. And I'm so excited to kind of be a small part of it and cover it.
Is it one coupon a month, Ben? Or?
Say that again, Michael.
Is it just one coupon a month? Like, how many did you get in a calendar year?
You got to play it by ear. You always know, you don't want to push the limit on how many's in the coupon book, but you want to make sure, because I think anybody's significant other can only tolerate so many Saturday nights that are gone by the wayside, especially when you already cover another sport. It's not like I don't have I already got to be busy during football season. So if I'm burning a lot of free weekends when it's not football season, I'm going to run the risk of a rightfully unhappy spouse. So, you got to keep that in balance. So the more good fights that are out there, the easier, or the more that I'll have to make that decision. But it's a good problem to have. That means that, you're going to get a lot of good content, and we're going to get a lot of fights, and fight fans want that. And that's what I think we all want.
As we round the finish line here for this week's episode of The Last Round, Mike, go ahead and let our listeners know where they can find us and follow us.
We're at The Last Round 12 on Instagram and Twitter, and be sure to join in next week. We'll be previewing the first week of Eddie Hearn's fight camp.
Absolutely. Yeah, the last one did well, so hopefully this one does well too. And also for our listeners, we have merchandise available. We had it available for a while with Fit Warrior brand. That's actually the shirt. Well, nobody can see the video, but Mike's wearing.
It's a podcast, but I've got it on.
Mike's wearing the shirt right now, so we appreciate that. And our big thanks once again to Ben Baby of ESPN. Finally, we got him on after multiple messages by listeners and fans of The Last Round who reached out to us because they want to know more about who this boxing writer guy was. And, we're glad he definitely jumped on and gave us some of his precious time this week. So once again, for our guest of the week and ESPN's Ben Baby, for my co-host Michael Shepard, I'm Danny Z. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round